How do you know if a longevity clinic is actually legit or just playing influencer marketing dress up? And what exact red flags do you warn your patients to look out for?
Well, here's a couple of things, right? One is, do they measure their outcomes data, right? Because if you're measuring the data and then you come in clinic and we say, listen, we've done 128 of these cases. And for every one of these cases, if we get your platelets above, a total dose of 10 billion aggregate platelets, there's 92% efficacy with a single procedure. So tracking outcomes data becomes a big one for the measuring of people's outcomes and the measuring of doses. And one of the first questions that we ask is, well, what was your dose?
Welcome back to the Primal Reset Podcast. Today, we're joined by Dr. Trevor Turner. He's the co-founder of Pravida Health, which is an Atlanta-based longevity and performance clinic redefining how high performers approach preventative health. He's a board-certified physician with a background in regenerative orthopedics, now leading the charge in precision diagnostics, peptides, and executive longevity programs. Dr. Turner, it is a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the show.
Elliot, thank you so much for having me on Primal Reset. I got to listen to a few of your previous episodes, and it sounds like what you're doing to kind of lead the charge in your sector is really cool.
What got you to start Pravida Health with your other co-founder? I know she has a great story as well. What got you to start it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Melissa Proctor and I, we both have kind of personal stories in healthcare that drove us to look for something better than the standard of care. For my family, it was that my grandfather had Alzheimer's, very difficult on my family, trying to figure out how to navigate the emotional fallout, the medical fallout, the loss of independence, and basically with a lack of available effective treatments for that. If you listen to Melissa's story, she became a caregiver at a very young age because her mother suffered from a lot of strokes and cardiac risk. And those are two of the kind of big things that really are part of the decline that you see as people age and get older in the United States. So thinking about how to be strong, how to be resilient was something that was inherent to me growing up playing football, then working with a lot of athletes in both the high school, collegiate, and professional level. So I had the opportunity when I was coming out of training to work with an amazing surgeon named Dr. James Andrews. And he, is in a lot of ways, he's invented kind of some of the modern techniques of orthopedics. But when I was there, we had a facility next to us called Exos. It used to be called Athletes Performance. And it was a combine training facility. So that was really cool because players would come down to train for the NFL draft. We would be physicians if they needed anything medical for them. And then there was a huge team built around them with people in PT and massage and nutrition and human performance. And so all of these different things. And, healthcare is really a giant team-based sport and maybe the ultimate team sport if you really get into it. But what I wanted to do was to take this approach where we said, gosh, like we can deliver elite level healthcare for people that not only, helps them get better, but really prevents them from being sick. And I think not everybody inherently defines themselves as an athlete, but most people are athletes in some capacity, whether they realize it or not. Now, the framework or the contextualization of that may be different depending on what you do. But so what I wanted to do was enable that on a much broader scale. And so when Pravida Health was created, it was sort of an easy leap to make for Melissa and I because she's an NBA executive here for the Atlanta Hawks. And my background was in sports medicine and performance, which was an easy thing, to put together. But I think given our family stories, we really wanted to think about we're here for maybe the elite athlete, but what about the master's athlete? What about the corporate athlete, right? Who's trying to lead from the boardroom? And what about the, athlete that maybe you're over 65 and really what your goal is to be able to be there for your grandkids, right? And what kind of things enable you to be strong and be resistant to disease in order to do that for many, many years. And so we approach people based on where they're at, right? And I think what's cool about humans is they're very unique. And everybody has their own goals, but everything is scalable, basically, right? Just depending on the goals that they have.
Longevity can be taken in so many definitions. And I think most people think longevity means walking into old age and slow walking. Do you believe that it should be a high performance sprint, and why?
Yeah, it's funny. Longevity is a term I've really struggled with and kind of tried to stay away from. And then, as we've had kind of a lot of meetings with our marketing, team and discussions about messaging, they're like, you have to use that for people to understand what you're doing. And I was influenced a lot by Peter Attia, so reading his book, listening to his podcasts a lot, and a few other podcast people on your show probably also listen to, like Andrew Huberman. And so I was really interested in the data driven scientific approach for that, right? And yeah, I think to me, understanding people's goals really matter. But the way that we put our program together is, a big part of that is, we do DEXA scans obviously here to make sure that people's both their bone density and like their visceral adipose is very low. Right. And then we have a lot of beginning discussions between that and VO2 max of like, okay, well, to protect your bone density, what kind of resistance training are you doing? What's your micronutrient status and your vitamin D? What's your hormone status like that contributes to that? If you're younger and you still have time, like we had an event where we saw, some young women who were in their mid and late 20s and early 30s. And it was kind of like, hey, like a lot of your bone bank, so to speak, is built before the age of 30, right? So if we have time to intervene now before things start, to decline, let's talk about how we intervene at this time, right? And we take a 60, 70-year time horizon to how we practice instead of a 1 year, I think, timeline that, most of the traditional healthcare system has evolved into that. And then there are some other options. If visceral adipose is high, depending on where your muscle tissue is, we use a metric for that called appendicular lean mass index, which is a measurement of the muscle in your arms and legs divided by your height. But we might use a different medicine or peptide if your muscle was super low compared to if it was high, but your visceral adipose was high or low. So, and then, for our members, I think it sort of doesn't matter how good you are today, right? Because it's like you can always be better. So the goal is, okay, well, here's your baseline data. And we get data from a lot of different forms because we get it from genetics, we get it from microbiome assessment, we get it from metabolomics. And we're very fortunate now to have a startup working with us, Delion Technologies, who does urine metabolomics. And they actually take one drop of urine in the morning to create a biochemical profile that enables people to enhance the way that they recover and train. So obviously that's geared a lot towards the professional athlete crowd because a lot of people are just going to say, well, I have a Garmin or an Apple Watch. I'll use that or a Morpheus or a Whoop. But this is like doing that to the billionth power, I guess, right? But then for us, being able to use those metabolomics as well to create what we call predictive analytics. So when we combine that with all the other data points, the idea is that we can get information on when you're going to get disease in the future, not just if you have disease now, right? And then the goal becomes is, do we eliminate that entirely, which is, obviously what we love to do, or can we delay it for a long, long time, right? And if the delay it is, hey, you were going to get Alzheimer's when you were, 68, but we can push it back till you're 78, like what does that journey now look like for your family and your company and your, whatever it is that is really important to people. And framing it in the context of social connection, meaning, purpose, just depending on what the person's trying to do.
Astounding to see all the technology come together in the wellness space and to help on the preventative side of things. And I know you touched on this earlier. There are so many different kinds of athletes. And when we say athletes, we obviously always think of the professional ones, that they're playing basketball or hockey or football or baseball or any other sport really. But there's always the average person who, whether we like to admit it or not, is a sort of athlete. I mean, if you're a corporate athlete, you're sitting in a chair every single day. Even if you work for someone else, you're sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, sometimes even longer. Back pain is going to be huge, and it's going to eventually add up throughout the years. If you are an executive or if you are a owner, an entrepreneur of any company, the amount of internal stress you go through every single day will break down your body in the long run, whether it's from disease, whether it's from, bone density or bone mass, whether it could be a million of things, but and I always try to stress this point as well. Preventative is something that we cannot obviously guarantee, but it's something that we can work towards feeling better every single day for the longest extent of our life.
I think you raise a good point about the entrepreneur. I mean, I'm very passionate about that space because I help companies like license intellectual property from universities and use that to create companies that are ultimately going to disrupt healthcare, which I think is really fun. But you see, these entrepreneurs who are visionaries, and the path from, hey, I'm the person who had the original idea, to, hey, I understand how to run and scale a company and establish product market fit and raise the right amount of capital at the right time and build the correct executive team around it. Like, it's a journey of transformation, right? And it's something that I think in a lot of ways America was built on. But there was a book that came out, and this was around sort of the barefoot running movement, called Natural Born Heroes. And what's fascinating is they're talking about the ancient Greeks, and they're talking about fitness. And there was a term or a sentence or phrase they used that said, well, to be fit is to be useful, right? And on one hand, you read that and I'm like, well, we don't want to discriminate or marginalize against people who don't have the level of fitness that they do. But I think the context of that statement was, it doesn't matter if you can bench press a car or if you can run a marathon. It's like, if your community or somebody around you needs you, and that requires you to create a hypothetical, right? Climb up to the second floor of a building that's burning and pull them out and save them, whatever, right? I mean, you have to be sort of built in a certain way to do that. And I think, that type of resilience and that type of building someone to be prepared for the unknown and the unknowable is really what we want to do in a medical context. And of course, that means I have to rely on other people who build, psychological resiliency, who build physical resiliency, emotional, et cetera. And so it takes a village. But I think the more data you get, when you go from that place of, well, we can't guarantee prevention. Well, it's like when we're working with a much bigger data set, and especially now with the advent of these, large language models and AI, we can crunch or we can analyze that data much more profoundly than we could before. And so then you go from a place of, well, we've got pretty good evidence, or we think this is really going to help, to, hey, we have a tool that can analyze every single case that's ever come through the NIH database. We can be a lot more confident in the things that we're telling you that are going to prevent disease or help you accomplish your goal.
And for me, it always comes down to, life is hard either way you pick it. I mean, being fit, being healthy is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. And being unhealthy, not feeling great, is also hard. And then the biggest thing is choose your heart.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In the United States, we definitely don't have a huge advantage with our food system and what is in all of our foods and what is easily accessible to us, and what financially as well, with all the prices of inflation and interest rates now, it's definitely difficult to afford good food and healthy food for us. So it's hard. It's not easy for everyone to be healthy. It's not easy for everyone to be unhealthy. But the ultimate choice comes down to you. Like you said, can you be useful in whatever context you want to be, but can you be useful? You don't want to be a burden on your friends and family, the people that you love, and you don't want to be a burden on yourself. But at the same time, you don't always want to be the only person with solution and help. So it's kind of a fine line to play, but I don't know. I always feel better when I have more energy, when I sleep better, when I'm able to work out and actually feel great after the workout as well. That's something my personal body has always felt better in, and I've done for such a long time. So it's a track that I always try to stay on. But to understand that there are differences from the professional athlete to the average everyday person, whether it's a blue collar job or a corporate job or an entrepreneur, or if you're in the garden every single day. I mean, we could talk about stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads or kids even, and all the kids nowadays being iPad kids and not really playing outside. I mean, that's a detriment to their health in the long run. You might not see it today, you might not see it tomorrow, but, you know, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the line, I mean, we're hearing about 20-year-olds having back pain all of a sudden because of the amount of stress that they've put on their bodies. And that's a whole nother topic with social media and stress and comparing ourselves to everyone. But I'm curious, talking with you, I know that you help a lot of entrepreneurs. If you could reverse one biomarkers in entrepreneurs or executives right now, which would you choose and why does no one talk about it?
Yeah, geez, one biomarker, pretty tough to answer. I mean, we certainly use, we use a collection of them that as a, the synergy of that whole is very, very valuable. VO2 max is a really big one. And some people who come in here, we have to tell them, you know, triathletes use this test basically to win their races. But, when you went through COVID and we saw that, some people were not making it off ventilators and other people's were. One of the reasons people who survived is because their VO2 max or their cardiopulmonary reserve was a lot higher, right? And then all of a sudden, somebody who said, no, 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 I'm not an athlete, they would go, oh, but if I take this test and you can help me increase my cardiopulmonary reserve, I'm likely to survive, amidst this kind of chaos. I was like, yes, that's what we see, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, cool, what day can I come in and do it? But I think, people are so different, right? We went through this age of population-based health, and it was like, okay, well, let's use evidence-based medicine, right? I mean, that's great, but like my co-founder, for example, she's an African American female, but she was born in the islands, the Caribbean islands. So, is she well represented in all of the evidence-based studies that are being published? Certainly not, right? She got two things going against her, right? Female and then African American. So there is not an evidence-based trial published for all of the variability that we see when you think about systems biology, right? So because of that, when you say, well, what's the single best biomarker? Usually my answer to that is, okay, well, come in and let's do a whole genome sequence. Let's put you on a wearable, like a continuous glucose monitor for a month. Let's do metabolomics. Let's do proteomics. Let's draw some labs. Let's get a VO2 max. Let's get a DEXA scan, an ultrasound, and maybe an MRI and or a cancer screen that we use with cell-free DNA. And then I can really confidently tell you which one. But it's hard for me to answer that because human beings are so unique, right? And it's a beautiful thing about them is so fascinating. But it also means that the strategy that we use with each person has to be different for every person, right? And so there's people that try to describe what's the name of that kind of medicine. They'll call it precision medicine or N equals one or individualized or personalized, precision, high performance, whatever you want to call it. I think people are trying to figure out what's the right term for it. But what you see is more and more people are sort of admitting, I'm fed up with the way that the system is designed. I've accessed the system personally, or someone in my family has accessed the traditional US healthcare system, and it's failed in many different ways. And I'm not content for that to be the status quo. So I'm going to go seek something out that gives me either what I need or gives me an advantage, right? Gives me a leg up, right? And I think we should be searching for advantages everywhere we can get them because, like you said, life is hard. And usually the best things about life are hard, right? Like I've got a 2-month-old, love her to death, hardest job in the world. My wife's an amazing human being, but I mean, like I want to be, and I'm an older dad, right? I'm 41. So like part of the why for me is like, okay, well, like I don't want to be decrepit when she graduates high school. Like I want to be able to take her on a trip and climb Kilimanjaro, right? But that also means if I want to climb Kilimanjaro in 20 years or 18 years or whatever, the amount of fitness or ability or health I have to have now has to be really, really elite in order to prevent that inevitable decline at some point in the future, right? That was a really hard question. I probably gave you a long-winded answer instead of a simple one, but I appreciate it.
I set you up for it. And one of the big reasons why I asked that question is we all seem to hear something or see something that someone else is using that we all look up to, whether it's an influencer of some sort, or it's a professional athlete, or it could be a politician. It could be whoever really it is, right? In the wellness industry, what we're seeing is personalization to everyone and the understanding of everyone being different and your body might need something different is what I'd try to push out there. to get everyone to understand, just because you see a professional athlete or you see a social media influencer or you see Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos doing a certain thing or taking a certain peptide or biomarker test or whatever it may be, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the right one for you.
Yeah. And then the question is, how do you figure out it's the right one? Well, you capture the data and that's how you figure it out. It's interesting because microplastics, for example, are becoming a big thing that a lot of people are talking about. And, I think traditional medicine, we're kind of like searching or probing for how dangerous microplastics really are. Like we know we've accumulated a lot more now than we did 10 years ago and more so than we did 10 years before that, if you just measure or test for it. And there hasn't been validated testing for that for the last 20 years. So that's part of the problem. But like we do a procedure here called therapeutic plasma exchange, right? And we saw a huge, increase in people get interested in it after Brian Johnson, who's kind of the most, maybe most professional, probably biohacker, maybe around, and one of them, maybe top 10 or something. So he started doing that. And then we had a lot of interest with the rest of the population. And you see it kind of trickle down. Like I was doing cases in Miami Beach. And so you'd see like people on the West Coast and people on the East Coast would kind of know about it. And then you see it start to move towards the middle of the country, which is kind of interesting how that happens. And so now we have people coming in and they're like, well, should I do this? And if I do plasma exchange, how many rounds should I do? And how far apart should they be? And do I need it every year or do I just need to do it once or a few times? And so for us to answer those questions, obviously, we've got some clinical trials that we reference. We do some urine testing to look for toxins as well as microplastics, so mold, looking for heavy metals, looking for, pesticides, herbicides, and other environmental hazards. And then we use some proteomics, like an assay where we look at which proteins, your bodies are expressing. And there's probably 5 of them that we've drilled down on based on some of the work that Edifice Health has done with the tests they've created. And then depending on what we find, people will come in, you sit in a chair, you watch a movie for a couple hours, you get an IV started in each arm. It filters out your dirty plasma. It puts your blood back in along with albumin, a little protein to just kind of keep your blood vessels open. And then your body regenerates that plasma over the next couple of days. And so, for me, like anything that we want to offer our patients, if it's considered, on the fringe, I'm like, okay, well, like, let me figure out how safe it is. And if it's feasible for me to do it myself, I'm going to do it first before the patients do it. And so that's what I did with plasma exchange. And it was really cool because we tracked my markers, before and after, and my immune system markers responded amazingly, like pre and post, to the point that I had, I put a little post on LinkedIn and I think Instagram. And then I had scientists reaching out to me being like, are you going to publish this data? And I was like, why? It's already out there. You can read it. I was like, I don't have a medical student or an intern who's like typing all my papers up for me, but I think that's the kind of validation that we need. And it's the validation that our patients want, right? I mean, I think if you talk about biomarkers, there's a lot of different markers you can use, and association is not always causation in the way we look at statistics, for sure. But I think people want to be transparent, and we've got transparency in a lot of other industries in the United States that we demand, and healthcare should be the same way, right? And so if you own all of your data, which is unusual because the way the law is written in the United States, if you go get medical testing done somewhere, that data is the property typically of the health system, right? And then you got to sign a little form that says like, can I get a record release? Can you give me my information? And that really bothered me always. I was like, listen, like this is coming from you. It should belong to you, and you should give me permission to look at it. Right. And that's the way we set up our practice. But now I'm getting off on a tangent, so I'm sorry about privacy and rights and stuff. So anyway.
The wellness industry is definitely changing, and you guys are definitely at the forefront of that change. And I personally believe it's in a positive direction, which is what I like to see. And I think everyone needs to learn more about. And that's why this podcast, I think, is beneficial for everyone listening out there to understand there is a different point of view. There is a different system that is out there that people can take advantage of. A question that I'd love to ask to hear your side of it is, what is the most common excuse that you hear from high-performing clients about why they can't start preventative or precision medicine? And how are you able to dismantle that?
I would say I'm very fortunate that the type of person who self-selects to come to Pravida Health, they're sort of already in that place to where they're like committed, right? Like they're like, I'm already committed. Give me the tools to reach this goal and like help give me the roadmap, right? So I'm lucky in that regard where I think a lot of times in traditional fee for service insurance-based medicine, you don't get that, right? Like people are just like, oh, like, let me look at my copay and like figure out if I'm going to go to physical therapy or not. But I would say time, of course. I mean, I see a lot of successful people, and success is defined in many different ways, I think, but inevitably it's the only non-renewable resource, right? I mean, you can make more money, you can build more muscle, you can do lots of different things with if you're committed to it and you have the right plan and the right team, but time is the biggest limiter, right? And so that becomes another discussion of like, okay, well, if we design a plan for you, we have to design a plan that fits in the context of your life, right? So there's an entrepreneur we take care of, amazing dude, super successful guy, runs ultra marathons, is just like the type of person that he's never going to stop. He's going to run his companies. He's going to have more kids. He's going to do ultra marathons, and recovery becomes very challenging in that context. And he leaves Monday through Friday. He travels, with multiple time zones every single week. And then he comes back, home on the weekends. And those things take a toll on you, right? You can measure heart rate variability. You can look at resting heart rate. You can see those things change. You can get more sophisticated markers, like I talked about with the urine metabolomics earlier. And then you've got different levers to pull to make that happen. But if I say, hey, we're going to put you on a peptide stack where you got to do 3 injections a day, which work great for some people, they just want the results. They don't care. But for him, does it need to be refrigerated? Does it not? Are people going to ask him questions in the airport if he's traveling with an insulin needle and a couple different bottles? Like, I mean, so you got to tailor things, I think, to the people's lifestyle and expectation. But time is inevitably the thing we've got to be most considerate of.
And how do you know if a longevity clinic is actually legit or just playing influencer marketing dress up? And what exact red flags do you warn your patients to look out for?
Yeah. So I get that question most frequently in the context of I've had an orthopedic injury of some kind, or let's say a long-standing injury that's gotten worse, like knee arthritis, let's say, right? And I've got to figure out if I should get PRP or if I should get stem cells. Should the stem cells be my own? Should they come from somewhere else? Do I need to fly out of the country so I can get culture expanded stem cells, which are not, you can't do in the United States unless you're part of a clinical trial. And we do destination health here, right? So I have people who, some fly commercial, some fly private. We have an awesome, outside travel coordinator who books everybody's hotels. She does all the transport to and from treatment. She handles all that. She's awesome, Julia, but with the International Collective. But I will tell people, I'm like, listen, like I know other people in the country and, maybe if you live in LA or San Diego, flying to Atlanta is not, what's best for you and your family. And so people say, well, how do I find somebody good? And I'll say, okay, well, here's a couple of things, right? One is, do they measure their outcomes data? Right? Because if you're measuring the data and then you come in clinic and we say, listen, we've done 128 of these cases. And for every one of these cases, if we get your platelets above a total dose of 10 billion aggregate platelets, there's 92% efficacy with a single procedure, right? When you sit down and have a conversation like that with a patient, that makes them very confident, which it should. Now, it's expensive to do that work. So we do that work because we think the patients deserve that. And other people do too. We're not the only people in the country, but the number of people who are doing the work is not big, right? So tracking outcomes data becomes a big one. For me, like I have subspecialty certification with ultrasound. We use a lot of ultrasound to both diagnose injury and treat injury at the same time. So finding somebody who's got imaging expertise, I think, is another thing. Now, not all longevity clinics need to have imaging expertise, depending on how you're structured, right? But for us, because we treat a lot of injury, that's a key component. And then the measuring, the measuring of people's outcomes and the measuring of doses. So I think, we've seen people come here and they've had treatments somewhere else. And a lot of times I'm a second or third opinion for people now because I've been doing it for 10 years and I had great mentors and that really helped. But, they'll say, hey, I had this treatment and it didn't work, right? And so we'll look at their case, and case selection is a very big deal to do it well. we'll say, well, give me everything about it. And one of the first questions we ask is, well, what was your dose? Right. And then usually people kind of look at you like, dose? Like, what are you talking about? And I'll say, well, how many total nucleated cell counts did you have? What was the viability of the stem cells that you got? Like, was it spread across a bunch of joints? Was it done in one particular place? And we've got published data that shows there's minimum thresholds, right? There's thresholds for the rotator cuff. There's thresholds for the lumbar, discs in your spine. There's thresholds for knee arthritis and so on, right? But if people aren't measuring, how do you know if you got the minimum effective dose, right? So usually, those are the conversations that I have. And, it's hard for me I can't be an expert in everything, right? There's a niche, certainly, I think I've carved out over time in my career. And understanding which things you're not an expert in and when you should refer somebody really helps.
And to add on that as well, I would even say for the people who are looking to optimize their health, a lot of the brands you see that are pushing on social media right now, make sure that they also do the follow-up behind it. There's a lot that will just do the testing and they'll do a bunch of testing, could be up to 100 or over 100 biomarkers that they test. Make sure they do the follow-up. Make sure you can understand the tests they do as well. For the average person, understanding what comes from a DEXA scan and what kind of biomarkers are actually showing up on your scan. You need to understand that. You need to have someone to explain that to you and explain what the next steps actually look like. Having a scan is great. I always say look for the follow-up as well. That's where you'll find the longevity clinics, the biomarker clinics, whoever is going to optimize your health. Those are the people who are actually going to help in the back end, not just sharing with you what exactly your numbers look like. My last question for you, Trevor, is what is one piece of wisdom, whether from a mentor, a patient, or your own life, that is truly resets the way you think about health and longevity?
I'm going to shout out to he wouldn't like it that I said New York Times bestseller, but an author named Michael Easter. He wrote a book called The Comfort Crisis, which I really loved. And I had an opportunity to actually go meet him and do a hike through Corcovado National Park in Costa Rica with a group of people from the Go Ruck community. But I think to your point earlier, when we kind of danced around a little bit, we talked about choose hard. It's this idea that the human being has evolved, from our ancestors in a certain way to have a certain capacity. And I think our world has evolved to create all of this comfort and convenience for us. And it's not necessarily something that makes you the strongest, most resilient version of yourself, right? And so I think, the deliberate choice to choose hard, a lot of times you see that pay off many, many dividends when it comes to reaching your optimal health and longevity.
Trevor, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast today. For everyone that is looking for more information from Pravida or from Trevor, I will have the links below in the description. Thanks so much for being part of it. We'll definitely have to do this again.
Thank you, man. I appreciate being here and all your time and expertise.